Hey everyone, welcome back to Humaning, the podcast where we get real about what it means to live well, grow as humans, and, actually enjoy the journey. I'm Emma, and I'm here with Leo. And today we're diving into a topic that I think is going to ruffle a few feathers. Motivation is a myth.
Hey, Emma. Hey, everyone. I'm so excited to dig into this one. I feel like motivation is one of those words we throw around a lot, especially in the personal development world. But when you really look at it, it's kind of slippery, right? Like everyone's waiting for motivation to appear, but what if it's not quite what we think it is?
Exactly. And honestly, I think we've all had those days, or even weeks, where we wait for motivation to magically strike. And then nothing happens. You're just sitting there, maybe scrolling, maybe feeling a little guilty, and it's like, where's my motivation? Why isn't it showing up for me today?
Right. And it's so easy to feel like there's something wrong with you, or like you're missing some secret ingredient that other people seem to have. I mean, I used to believe that, for sure. I thought if I just found the right hack or inspiring quote, suddenly I'd be unstoppable.
Oh my gosh, yes. I used to keep a whole Pinterest board full of motivational quotes, and I'd scroll through it, hoping one would just flip a switch in my brain. Spoiler alert, sometimes I just ended up feeling guilty because I still didn't want to do the thing.
That's so relatable. And actually, before we get too deep into this, if you're listening and you're nodding along, or even if you're not, but you're curious about this conversation, it would mean so much to us if you'd hit that like button, subscribe, or share the podcast with a friend. It really helps more people find humaning and join these honest chats.
Absolutely. We love having you as part of this community, and your support honestly keeps us going. But okay, back to motivation and why it's not the magical answer we want it to be. Leo, I'm curious. Was there a moment for you when you realized motivation maybe wasn't all it was cracked up to be?
Yeah, definitely. I remember back in college, I had this huge project to finish, and I kept telling myself, I just need to get motivated. And every day I'd wait for that spark. It never came. Eventually, the deadline got so close that I was forced to just start, and it was in the doing, not in the waiting, that things actually happened. That experience really shifted my perspective.
That's so interesting. I feel like so many of us have that moment where the pressure gets high enough that you just act, whether you feel like it or not. And then sometimes the motivation actually shows up after you start. It's almost backwards from what we're taught to believe.
Exactly. I've heard it called the motivation action loop. Like, we think motivation leads to action, but in reality, taking action is often what creates motivation. Once you start, you build a little momentum, and then it's easier to keep going.
That's so true. There's this thing I read once. It was like, you don't wait to feel like brushing your teeth. You just do it because it's part of your routine. Imagine if we treated more parts of our lives that way, instead of waiting for inspiration to strike.
Totally. And I think a lot of people get stuck because they're comparing their behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. Like they see successful people and think, wow, they must wake up every morning so motivated. But really, most people are just putting in the work day after day, even when they don't feel like it.
For sure. Actually, I had a conversation with a friend about this not long ago. She was beating herself up for not feeling motivated to work out. She thought it meant she wasn't meant to be someone who exercises. But when I asked her to just try something small, like going for a 10-minute walk, she started to notice it got easier to do more. The motivation actually followed her action.
I love that. It's like lowering the bar. I think sometimes we set this huge expectation that we need to be super fired up before we start anything, but actually taking one tiny step can break the inertia. I've used that so many times in my life. The hardest part is always getting started.
Absolutely. And I think there's something to be said for the rituals or routines that help us bridge that gap. Like, I have a little start signal. I make a cup of tea, put on a certain playlist, and then I just begin, even if I don't feel like it.
Oh, I love that. I'm a big believer in routines too. For me, it's about setting up my environment so the path of least resistance leads me to the thing I want to do. If I want to read more, I leave books out where I'll see them. If I want to eat healthier, I prep veggies in advance. It's not about waiting for motivation, it's about making it easier to make the right choice.
That's so practical. And it reminds me of something James Clear says in Atomic Habits, that you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Like motivation is fleeting, but systems are reliable.
Exactly. And I think the culture around motivation can actually be kind of harmful. It puts all this pressure on us to feel a certain way. And when we don't, we think we're failing. But what if it's just normal? What if everyone feels unmotivated a lot of the time?
That's such an important point. I think it's so validating to hear that. Like, you can want to achieve something and still not feel excited about it every single day. And that doesn't mean you're not cut out for it. It just means you're human.
Yeah. And you know, I actually had this moment at work recently where I had a big report to finish, and I just didn't want to do it. I sat there staring at my screen thinking, if I just wait a little longer, maybe I'll get motivated. But instead, I set a timer for 10 minutes and told myself, just do something. By the end of the 10 minutes, I was in the zone. It was like the act of starting was the unlock.
That's a great trick. I use timers too, sometimes called the Pomodoro technique, right? Set a short window, commit to working, and then take a break. It makes things feel less overwhelming.
Yeah. And honestly, the more I do it, the more I realize that motivation is really just a feeling. And feelings are so fleeting. If we rely on them to run our lives, we're going to be on a constant roller coaster.
So true. And I think there's something empowering about taking motivation off its pedestal. Like, we don't have to be at the mercy of our moods. We can design our days so that action is just part of the flow, regardless of how we feel.
I love that. And it's not about being robotic, but about being intentional. Like you can still listen to your body and your emotions, but you don't have to let them be the boss of you.
Exactly. And sometimes the best self-care is just showing up, even when you don't want to. That's how you build trust with yourself. Like, hey, I can count on me.
That's huge. I think that's where a lot of confidence comes from. Not from waiting to feel ready, but from proving to yourself, day after day, that you can do the hard things.
So, if motivation is a myth, or at least not the whole story, what do you think is the alternative? Like, if someone's listening right now and thinking, okay, I get it, but what do I actually do instead? What would you say?
Great question. I think the alternative is discipline, but not in a harsh, punishing way. More like self-compassionate discipline. It's about creating habits and routines that make it easier to do what matters, even when you don't feel like it. And then, celebrating the small wins along the way.
I love that. Self-compassionate discipline. That's such a good way to put it. And I'd say, too, get really clear on your why. Sometimes we lose motivation because we forget the reason behind what we're doing. When I remind myself why I want to, say, meditate or write, it's easier to show up even on the hard days.
Why is everything. For me, I try to tie the action to a bigger identity. Like, instead of, I need to go for a run, I tell myself, I'm the kind of person who takes care of my body. That little shift makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And I think another thing is to lower the resistance. Like, if you want to start something new, make it as easy as possible to start. You don't have to write a whole novel, just write one sentence. You don't have to run a marathon, just put on your sneakers.
Yes. And I think celebrating progress, no matter how small, is so important. We're so quick to beat ourselves up for what we don't do, but we rarely give ourselves credit for the things we do, even if they're tiny steps.
Totally. And I think that ties into this whole idea of self-trust. The more you show up for yourself, the more you build that trust, and the less you need to rely on fleeting feelings of motivation.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you're listening and you feel like you've been waiting for motivation, you're not alone. We've all been there. But you don't have to wait. You can start now, right now, with something small.
Yes! And if you want, you can even pause the podcast. Do one little thing you've been putting off and then come back. We'll be here.
I love that. And honestly, I think there's so much freedom in realizing you don't have to feel motivated to live the life you want. You can just begin and let the feelings catch up later.
That's so true. And sometimes you might never feel motivated, and that's okay too. You can still make choices that align with who you want to be.
Exactly, and it's not about being perfect. Some days will be easier than others, and that's part of being human. But the more you practice showing up, the easier it gets.
Absolutely. And I think we should talk a little bit about the role of rest and not confusing lack of motivation with burnout or needing a break. Because sometimes the best thing you can do is actually rest.
Oh, that's such a good point. There's a difference between not feeling motivated because you're tired or burned out, and not feeling motivated because your brain just wants to avoid discomfort. Learning to tell the difference is key.
For sure. And I think listening to your body and being honest with yourself is so important. Sometimes pushing through isn't the answer. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is take a nap or go for a walk.
Yeah, and that goes back to self-compassionate discipline. It's not about grinding yourself into the ground. It's about making choices that serve you in the long run.
Exactly. And I think that's something a lot of us are still learning. It's okay to rest, and it's okay to not feel 100% all the time. You can still build habits and routines that support you, even on the tough days.
Absolutely. And honestly, the more gentle I am with myself, the more consistent I am over time. It's kind of ironic. Being kind to yourself actually makes you more productive in the long run.
So true. And I think that's what we're really talking about here, consistency over intensity. Motivation might help you start, but it's consistency that keeps you going.
100%. And I think if you're listening and you take away one thing, let it be this. You don't need motivation to make progress. You just need to start, however small, and keep showing up.
Yes, and celebrate those little wins along the way. Progress is progress, no matter how tiny.
Absolutely. And if you have a story about how you've overcome the motivation myth or a tip that's worked for you, drop it in the comments or reach out to us. We love hearing from you.
Oh, I love that idea, Leo. Hearing other people's stories can be so encouraging. Sometimes just knowing you're not alone in the struggle is huge. Actually, that makes me think. Has anyone ever reached out to you with a story about how they broke free from the motivation trap?
Yeah, actually, a listener messaged me a few weeks ago. She said she'd spent years waiting to feel motivated to start her side business, but it never happened. Finally, she just decided to set a 5-minute timer every night and do whatever she could in that window. Some nights she barely did anything, but other nights she'd get on a roll and work for an hour. 6 months later, she'd launched her website and landed her first client. She told me, if I'd waited for motivation, I'd still be dreaming.
That's such a great example. I think people underestimate how powerful those little 5-minute actions can be. It's like once you've taken that first tiny step, the next one doesn't feel so scary. It's almost like you trick your brain into building momentum.
Yes, and that's something I wish more people realized. The myth part of motivation isn't that it doesn't exist. It's that it's not this magic switch that turns on when you need it. It's more like a bonus you might get after you've already started.
Totally. And I think people get discouraged when they look at successful people and think, wow, they must be so motivated all the time. But if you talk to anyone who's accomplished something meaningful, they'll usually say, there were plenty of days when they didn't feel like showing up, but they did it anyway.
Exactly. Honestly, some of the most productive people I know are the best at doing things they don't want to do. It's not that they love every minute. They just have a system for getting themselves to act, whether they're feeling it or not.
That's so true. And I think that's why it's important to be gentle with yourself on the tough days. Like, I've definitely had times where I showed up for my morning journaling practice and just wrote, I don't want to do this today, over and over. But I still showed up. And that's what matters.
Absolutely. There's something to be said for honoring the process, even when it's messy. I think we have this expectation that progress should always feel good or look Instagram-worthy. But the reality is, most of it happens in those ordinary, unglamorous moments.
Yes. And sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come after a string of those unmotivated days. It's like you're laying the groundwork, even when it doesn't feel like it in the moment.
I couldn't agree more. And you know, I had a mentor once who used to say, "You don't have to feel like it. You just have to do it." That stuck with me. It's not about faking it or forcing yourself. It's about removing motivation from the equation and focusing on the action.
I love that. And I think that's so helpful for anyone who struggles with perfectionism, too. Like, if you're always waiting for the perfect time or the perfect mood, nothing ever gets done. But if you just take a step, however imperfect, you're moving forward.
Absolutely. And sometimes you surprise yourself. Like you think you're going to have a terrible workout or a totally uninspired writing session, and then it turns out to be one of your best days. You never know until you start.
That's such a good point. I think it's easy to forget that our brains are really bad at predicting how we'll feel once we're in motion. I've lost count of how many times I dreaded doing something, but once I actually started, it wasn't nearly as bad as I'd imagined.
Same. And sometimes it actually feels good once you're in it. Like the act of starting kind of turns down the resistance. It's wild how that works.
It really is. And maybe that's something listeners can experiment with. Just noticing what happens when you start, even if you don't feel like it. Keep a little action journal and see if your mood changes after you take that first step.
Oh, I love that idea. It's all about collecting your own data, right? We're all different, so it can be empowering to see your own patterns. Maybe you realize that, hey, 80% of the time you feel better after you start. That's pretty good odds.
Definitely. And I think that's the key. Learning to trust yourself and your process, rather than waiting for some outside force to zap you with inspiration. You become your own source of momentum.
For sure. And you know, we've talked a lot about routines and habits, but I think another piece of the puzzle is your environment. Like, are you setting yourself up to make it easy to do the things you want to do?
Oh, yeah. Environment is huge. I know for me, if my workspace is cluttered, I find every excuse to avoid sitting down to write. But if I take 5 minutes to tidy up, suddenly it feels so much more inviting.
Same here. I call it reducing friction. If I want to go to the gym in the morning, I put my workout clothes out the night before. If I want to eat healthier, I prep meals so I'm not tempted by junk food. It's about making the right choice, the easy choice.
That's so smart. And it's kind of freeing, honestly. It takes willpower out of the equation, which, let's be honest, is a finite resource for most of us.
Absolutely. And I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up. They think they need more willpower, when what they really need is a better system. Motivation and willpower are nice when you have them, but you can't count on them to show up every day.
Exactly. It's like building a life that works with your natural rhythms instead of against them. And then, when motivation does show up, it's just a bonus.
Yes. And it's funny, because once you stop obsessing over motivation, you actually start to notice it popping up more often. It's almost like it likes to show up when it's not being chased.
That's so true. It's like when you stop making motivation a requirement, you stop stressing about it, and then you just get to enjoy it when it's there.
Totally. And I think that's why it's important to celebrate those moments too. Like, if you do feel motivated, ride that wave. Just don't make it the foundation of your habits.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really healthy approach. Use motivation when it's there, but don't depend on it.
For sure. You know, this actually reminds me of something I heard from a marathon runner. She said, "You only feel motivated for the first mile. After that, it's all about grit and routine." That really stuck with me. You can't run 26 miles on motivation alone.
Wow, that's such a powerful image. And I think it applies to so many things in life. Whether it's building a career, learning a new skill, or just getting through a tough season. Motivation might get you started, but it's consistency that gets you across the finish line.
Exactly. And I think that's a message we don't hear often enough. We're so bombarded with get motivated and find your passion, but rarely do we hear just show up and do the work, even when it's boring or hard.
Yes, and honestly, sometimes things do feel boring, That's normal. It doesn't mean you're on the wrong path or that you're not passionate enough. It just means you're human.
100%. And I think that's a really important reframe for anyone who feels discouraged. You don't have to love every minute. You just have to love the process enough to keep coming back.
That's so well said, Leo. And I think that's a great place to invite our listeners to reflect a little. Maybe ask yourself, what's one thing you've been waiting to feel motivated to do? And what's one tiny action you could take today, even if you don't feel like it?
I love that. And if you want, share it with us in the comments or on social media. Sometimes making it public can help with accountability too.
For sure. And we're always here to cheer you on. There's nothing more inspiring than seeing people show up for themselves, even in small ways.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, Emma, what's something in your life right now where you're applying this idea? Where you're not feeling super motivated, but you're showing up anyway?
Oh, great question. Honestly, my meditation practice. There are days when I just want to skip it or I feel like it's not working. But I remind myself that the value is in the showing up, not in having a perfect session. Even if I just sit for 2 minutes, I'm keeping that promise to myself.
That's awesome. And it's such a good reminder that the size of the action doesn't matter as much as the consistency. For me, it's probably stretching. I know my body feels better when I do it, but it's so easy to let it slip. So now, I just try to do 5 minutes every night before bed. Tiny commitment, big payoff over time.
I love that. And it's so approachable. You don't have to overhaul your life overnight. Just pick one area, make one small commitment, and let it build.
Exactly. And I think that's how you start to trust yourself. You keep those little promises, and over time you realize you're capable of so much more than you thought.
Yes. And that's how you build real confidence, not by waiting to feel ready or motivated, but by proving to yourself day in and day out that you can take action.
Absolutely. And I think if more people knew that, they'd be a lot kinder to themselves. It's not about being perfect or always feeling inspired. It's about showing up, even when you don't want to.
Totally. And I think that's the heart of what we're talking about today. Motivation is nice, but it's not the secret. The secret is consistency, self-compassion, and making it as easy as possible to do the things that matter.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And honestly, I hope that's what people take away from this episode. You don't have to wait for motivation. You can just start, even if it's messy, even if it's small.
Yes, and the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. It's a muscle you build over time.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up, I just want to thank everyone for listening and being part of this conversation. It means so much to us to have you here on Humaning. If you enjoyed today's episode, go ahead and give us a like, subscribe, or share it with a friend who might need a little encouragement. It really, really helps.
Yes, thank you all so much for being with us today. Your support is what keeps this community growing, and we're so grateful for each of you. Remember, you don't need motivation to make a change. You just need to take that first, tiny step.
Couldn't agree more. Keep showing up for yourself, keep being gentle, and don't forget to celebrate every little win. We're cheering you on.
We really are. Thanks again for tuning into Humaning. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.